I think that at this point of our C# course, you should be able to create more complex program. And for that, I have prepared the following exercise. Create a console application that mimics the behavior of the contact application on your phone. The contact is just a name and a phone number, and the application itself should add contacts, display a contact by a number, view all contacts, and search for contacts for a given name. So if you feel like you want to try it on your own, make sure to pause this video and come back once you are finished to see if the implementation is similar to mine's or if you have gone a different path. Okay, and for me, in order to complete that exercise, I will create a new console application in Visual Studio. So I'll just click on the file, new project, and from the console templates, I will select the console application in .NET Core. I will click next. Let's name it Phonebook console, and let's create that project. And by default, Visual Studio has created an empty console project in which we have only one class, which is the program class. And here we have the static void main method. And as you already know, this is the entry point for our program. And in here, there's only one console write-line invocation. So maybe let's get rid of that. And instead, I will just console write-line hello from the console Phonebook app. Before we will start implementing this application, let's think about what kind of classes we will need in the solution. Since the program is responsible for managing contacts, I think that the base class should be contact, right? So a name and a number bundled together should create a contact. And then we'll also need some phonebook. Let's say that this class will be responsible for managing the contacts. So operations like adding contact, removing contact, or even displaying contact should be included in the phonebook class. So let's start by creating the first class, which is the contact class. So let's add a new class. Let's name it contact. And this class will have only two properties. As we already know, it will be a string, a name, and also as a string, it will be the number. Besides those two properties, I think we can add a constructor in this contact class, which will set those two values. So let's create a public constructor into which we'll pass the name and also the number as a string. And all we will do in this constructor is just set the name as the name parameter and the number property as the number parameter. So that should be it for the contact class itself. Now let's go ahead and add the phonebook class. So new class, let's name it phonebook. And as I said, this class will be responsible for managing the contact list. So I would say we need some property that will store the contact information, which should be private, because we don't want anything else outside of this class to be able to modify the contact list for a given phonebook. So let's create a private list of contacts. And let's name it contacts with the underscore, just to indicate that this is a private field. Let's also add the getter and a setter. And now we can proceed to implement the following operations. So the first operation will be to add a contact. So let's create a public void method. It will be void because it will not return anything from this method. It will just add the contact to the contact list. And let's name it add contact. And this method will take a contact object as the parameter. So let's add that argument. And everything that this method will do is basically add the incoming contact to the contact list that we have for this Phonebook class. So on the contacts list, I will invoke the add method, into which I will pass the contact parameter. And this might seem like a very simple solution, but for our needs, it is just enough. But if there is some validation required, for example, if we would have to check the name to be at least 3 letters, this method will be the place in which we will do that. But for now, we are skipping any validation. We are just adding the contact to the contact list. So moving further, the next operation is to display a contact by the number. So we'll need to create a method that will accept a string number as a parameter, and based on that number, it will display the contact details. So let's say that it will be just the name and the number. So let's add a public void display contact, which will accept a string number as the parameter. And in this method, first of all, we'll have to find the matching contact from our contact list. So let's create some variable. Let's name it contact, which will be equal to contacts. And then with the first or default method, we will be able to get the matching contact basing on some lambda expression. And the lambda expression will look like this. So for a given contact, which is just C in this case, we'll check if the C.number is equal to number. And by doing that, we'll either get a null value if the contact is not found based on the number, or a given number which matches the predicate as we have typed as the lambda expression. So the contact can be either a null value or some specific contact. So maybe let's first handle the null value. So I will say just if the contact is equal to null, then I will just display contact not found. And in the else statement, we know that the contact exists in our contacts list, and we can display the details of that contact. So let's console writeline contact, and I will display the name and the number. So contact.name and contact.number. And that should be it for the display contact method, in which we are looking for a given contact based on the number that will come from the user. So moving on to the next requirement, we need to display all contacts from our Phonebook. So let's create another public void method. I will name it display all contacts, and this one will not take any parameter because there's no need for that. And in order to display all contacts, I think that the easiest way is to iterate over every element in our contacts list and display the same details as we did in the display contact method. So to do that, I will just use the for each loop, and we will iterate over the contact private variable. And let's name the loop argument as contact. And in the loop itself, we'll do the same thing as we did in the else instruction, which is just to console writeline contact name and number. But copying and pasting the same line of code is not a very good practice. So in order to get rid of the same line of code in two places, maybe you can do a small refactor and extract this console writeline into its own method. So let's actually do that. So in the Phonebook class, I will add the private void method. Let's name it display contact details. And this private method will take a contact as the argument. And the implementation will be basically the console write invocation with the contact details. Now, as we move that logic into a private method, we can invoke it in the else statement and just pass the contact to it, and do the same thing in the loop. So here we'll display contact details for the contact, which is the current loop element. So in this way, we did some small refactor, and instead of having the same line of code in two places, we extracted that into a private method, which we are using in two places. Okay, I think that the display all contacts method is completed. So moving further, the last requirement is to search for a contact for a given name. So this method should behave exactly like the Phonebook contact application that you have on your phone. So whenever you start typing the name, it will fetch all of the contacts that are matching, meaning that the contact's name might only contain a certain phrase, and it doesn't have to be equal to the whole search phrase. So let's create another public void method. Let's call it display matching contacts. And this method will take the search phrase as an input. So it will be a string search phrase. And now we'll have to somehow filter the existing contact list and get only those contacts which contains the search phrase in their names. So in order to do that, I'll create a new variable. Let's name it matching contacts, which will be equal to contacts.where. And as we already know the where method, we'll filter out the elements of a list basing on some predicate. And our predicate will be a following lambda expression. We need the contact whose name. And now if we did something like that, so a contact whose name is equal to search phrase, in that way we would only get those contacts that exactly matches the search phrase. And we don't want to do that. We want to get the contacts that contain the search phrase in the name. So instead of the equals operator, we can invoke the contains method on the name, into which we'll pass the search phrase. In this way, let's say that we have a contact named Bill, and then the search phrase will be equal to LL. Then this predicate should match, and we'll get the Bill contact as one of the results. So after we have filtered those contacts, we can create a list of them using the toList method. And now, having the matching contacts, we'll have to also display every one of them. So it will be very similar to the for each loop as we did in the display all contacts method. But now, instead of iterating over the contacts list, we'll iterate over the matching contact list. Once again, you see that we have almost exactly the same lines of code in two places. And I think that this is another example where we can refactor the code a bit and extract another private method in order to not duplicate the code. And if you look closely at those two loops, the only difference is the array that we are iterating over. So in the display all contacts, we are iterating over the contacts list, and here we are iterating over the matching contacts. So the list itself to iterate over should be the parameter to this method. So let's create another private void method. Let's call it display contacts details, which will take a list of contacts. Let's name them contacts. And in this method, we'll basically do the same thing as we did in the display all contacts method. But now we'll iterate over the contacts. So for each contact in the contacts, we'll display the contacts details. Moving back to the display all contacts method. Now here I'll just invoke the display contact details, into which I will pass the private contacts variable. And lastly, I will refactor the display matching contacts method, and instead of the loop, I will also invoke the display contacts details, into which I'll pass the matching contacts list. So in this way, we managed to do a second refactor, and this time we get rid of the loop and we moved it to the private display contacts details method. Well, I think that we have covered all of the 4 requirements. So now we can add a contact, display a contact basing on the number, we can display all contacts, and also we can search for the contacts for a given name. So having that Phonebook class implemented, we can go back to the program.cs, in which we'll have to complete the console application. So now we'll have to get the user's input, and in some way we'll have to operate on a Phonebook class object in order to add the contact or display the contacts. So maybe first of all, we'll let the user know what can he do in order to operate in the application. I will just console right line select operation, and we'll have the following operations. So first one will be to add contact. The second one will be to display contact by number. The third one will be to view all contacts. And the last one, so fourth, will be search for contacts for a given name. And now we'll need to get the user's input. So I'll create a var user input variable, which will be equal to the console readline result. So as we have the user's input in our main method, we'll need to create a switch statement or a bunch of if statements in order to invoke a given operation on a Phonebook object. But we don't have a Phonebook object yet, so maybe let's first create that. So I will say that var Phonebook is equal to new Phonebook. And maybe with the switch statement, we will switch on the user input, and we'll have at least 4 cases. So in the case number 1, we'll be adding a new contact to the Phonebook object, but maybe for now let's just add empty cases. So we'll do that for the case 1, for the case 2, case 3, and the last case, so case 4. And also let's add a default case, so whenever a user inputs a wrong number, we'll just display select valid operation. Having that switch statement in our main method, we can start to implement the first case. So in here, whenever a user inputs D1, we want to add a new contact to the Phonebook object. So in order to do that, first of all, we have to get the information about the contact itself from the user. Let's console right line input contact name, or maybe just contact name. Let's read that name from the console. So var name is equal to console readline. And the same will apply to the number. So I'll just copy and paste and replace the name with a number. Having that two information about the contact, now we are able to create a new contact. So let's create the var new contact variable, which will be a new contact object into which I'll pass the name as the first argument to the constructor and the number as the second. And now we are able to invoke the add contact method into which we'll pass the new contact from the user. I think that should be enough for the add contact operation. So maybe at this point it would be good to start the project and at least test this first case. So let's run the Phonebook console application. We have the hello from the console Phonebook application message, and the program asks us to select the given operation. So for now, I'll just click on the one and press enter. The contact name, it will be Bill. The number will be 51. Let's click enter. And we get the following exception for some reason. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. And if you look closely, the contacts get returned a null. Maybe let's stop the program and see why is that. So the exception was thrown in this line of code because the contacts private variable was a null reference. And this is because when we have declared the contacts private variable, we didn't initialize it to a new list of contacts, and therefore this exception occurs whenever we try to refer to the contacts variable. So in order to get rid of that exception, in this line of code, you can say that the contacts is a new empty list of contacts object. And this should be good enough, so let's run the program again. One more time I will press 1, name as Bill, number 51. And this time we didn't get the exception, but the program is terminated, meaning that it has stopped. And this is not the behavior that we want to achieve in our program. So let's go back to the main method. And in order to the program not to terminate whenever user selects the first operation, we'll have to create a while loop until the user explicitly wants to exit the program. So let's create a while loop. And this while loop will be running forever, so meaning that the expression will be just the true value. And into this loop, I will just cut the switch statement and put it in the while loop. But having this condition, so while true, we need some other way for the user to be able to exit the program. So maybe let's say that whenever the user input is equal to X letter, the user wants to exit the program. So let's add another case for the X, in which instead of breaking the switch statement, we'll just return from the main method, meaning that the program will be terminated. And also let's add another console write line so that the user knows how to exit the program. So let's just display the following message. Press X to exit. Okay, now if I run the program, we should be able to at least add more than one contact with the first case, and also we should be able to exit it with the X letter. So let's test that. Let's click on one, Bill 51. And this time, even though I didn't specify the second operation, the program still asked me for the contact name. And this is not the correct behavior. Instead, it should ask me to insert another operation. So let's exit the running program once again. And let's think, why is that happening? So whenever I input the first value as a 1, then we go to the while true loop, we navigate to the switch statement, and the user input is equal to 1, so we end up in this implementation. But after the switch, we are not taking the user input once again, and therefore we are stuck in the first case forever. In order to give the user the ability to select another operation, after the switch statement, I will console writeline, select operation, and then we'll need to get a new user input. So once again, the user input will be equal to console readline. So this time, if I run the program again, I can select 1 to add a contact, Bill 51, and this time the program asks us for another operation. So let's add another contact, let's say John 52, and we can press X to exit the program. And indeed, it has terminated, meaning that the X operation is also working. Okay, so moving on, we have implemented the add contact feature, but from the user perspective, for now we are not able to verify that the contact has been added to the phone book. So maybe let's go to the second case, in which we'll have to display a contact by the number. So in this case, we'll need to get the contact number from the user. Maybe let's just console writeline contact number to search. And just read from the console the search number. And then on the Phonebook object, we can invoke the display contact method, and as the number, we'll just pass the search number variable. And that should be it for the second case. So let's move on to the third one. Here we need to display all of the contacts, which should be very simple. So Phonebook, display all contacts, and that's it. And lastly, so in the fourth case, we need to search for a contact for a given name. So let's console writeline name search phrase, and let's get that value from the user. So search phrase will be equal to console readline, and then on the Phonebook we'll invoke the display matching contacts method and pass the search phrase as the parameter. So in this way, we have completed all of the 4 requirements for the contact Phonebook application. We can run it and test if all of them are working correctly. So maybe before we add a new contact, let's display all contacts, and this list for now should be empty. So let's press 3 and nothing happens, right? So the contact list is empty. Now I can add a new contact, so let's press 1. Again, it will be Bill with the 51. And let's add another contact. Maybe this time it will be John 52. And if I display all contacts now, the program should display 2 contacts which I have just added. So let's press 3. And as you can see, the following contacts have been displayed. So it is Bill with 51 as the number, and also John. Moving on, if I select the operation number 4, so I will search for the contacts for a given name. And if I insert the, let's say, O letter, the Bill should be skipped from the results, And the only result should be the John contact. So let's click enter. And as you can see, the program has displayed the John contact. So this functionality is correct as well. And lastly, we have to test the second operation, which is display contact by the number. So maybe let's first of all insert the number which doesn't exist in our program. 60 is a good example. And we get the information that the contact is not found. So let's test the same operation with a valid contact number, which is a 51. And this time the program displays the correct information about the bill contact. So all of the 4 features of our console phonebook application are working correctly. And we can also press X to exit the program. And in this way, we managed to complete the whole exercise.